Married to an avoidant, why you always feel alone, even when you're not. Being married to someone with an avoidant attachment style is one of the most paradoxical emotional experiences a person can endure. You're not technically alone. You share a home, a bed, a life. And yet deep inside, it can feel like you're married to a ghost. Someone whose body is present, but whose heart is kept behind an invisible wall. You try to talk, but the conversations remain shallow. You try to connect, but it always slips through your fingers. You offer love, touch, kindness, but they flinch, withdraw, or go silent. It's like being emotionally homeless in your own home. And the hardest part? You start to question your sanity, because from the outside, everything seems fine. But from the inside, you feel like you're slowly disappearing. Avoidant partners often don't shout, they don't hit, they don't even argue much. Their weapon is absence, emotional absence. They don't deny you physically, but they deny you emotionally. You try to reach them in moments of stress, pain, or need, and they're not there. Not really. They may be polite, calm, even helpful. But something vital is always missing. Attunement. That soul-deep sense of, I see you, I feel you, I'm here with you. When you cry, they freeze. When you celebrate, they stay distant. And when you share your feelings, they change the subject, get defensive, or pretend they didn't hear you. It feels like you're screaming in a soundproof room. And here's the confusing part. Avoidants don't always mean to hurt you. Their emotional detachment isn't always a choice. They were wired that way through early experiences of rejection, neglect, or inconsistency. To them, closeness feels threatening, suffocating. So while you crave intimacy, they crave space. And not because you did anything wrong, but because closeness activates their deepest fear of being overwhelmed, controlled, or ultimately abandoned. Ironically, their defense against being abandoned is to pre-abandon you, to stay just far enough that they can't be hurt, but far enough that you always feel rejected. This is why you're always the one trying, the one reading books, watching videos, going to therapy, initiating connection, solving problems, and carrying the emotional weight of the relationship. You adapt to their silence. You normalize the lack of touch. You excuse their dismissiveness. You tell yourself they're just stressed or that's just how they are. But deep inside, you ache. You long to be held, not just physically, but emotionally. You long for eye contact that feels like home, for a hug that melts your armor, for words that say, I'm here and I choose you. But with an avoidant, that moment rarely comes. And when it does, it often vanishes as quickly as it appears. The loneliness in a marriage with an avoidant isn't just about not being spoken to, it's about not being felt. You could be lying next to them in bed and still feel more alone than if you were sleeping in a separate house. It's the emotional starvation that slowly eats away at your sense of worth. You start to believe you're too needy, too sensitive, too much. And that's the most insidious part, how this dynamic turns you against yourself. You start shrinking, you silence your needs, you walk on eggshells just to keep the peace. And before you know it, you've lost touch with who you really are. Avoidants often mistake distance for safety, and in doing so, they slowly destroy the very connection they secretly crave. Because yes, they do crave it. Deep down, under all those walls and survival strategies, they want love too, but they don't know how to trust it. They don't know how to let it in without fearing that it will control them or expose their vulnerability. So they keep love at arm's length and call it peace, but it's not peace. It's emotional exile. And you're the one left outside, banging on the door of a heart that's been locked for years. Being married to an avoidant is also exhausting. You find yourself becoming hypervigilant, reading every micro-expression, trying to decode their moods, wondering, are they mad at me? Did I say too much? Should I have waited before bringing that up? Your nervous system is always on alert, trying to manage their emotional temperature just to maintain harmony. But the cost is high: chronic anxiety, emotional burnout, and a life where you're constantly over-functioning just to compensate for their underfunctioning. And yet, when you bring it up, when you say, I feel alone, or I need more connection, they act confused. They may say, "I'm here, aren't I?" Or, "I don't understand what you want from me." And that's when you realize you're speaking two different emotional languages. To them, being physically present is enough. To you, presence without emotional connection is like a meal with no flavor. It fills space but leaves you empty. This disconnection also shows up in intimacy. Avoidants often struggle with vulnerability, even during sex. It might be mechanical, routine, or completely absent. And if you try to talk about it, they shut down or accuse you of pressuring them. But what you're really craving isn't just sex, it's emotional intimacy. You want to be known, felt, touched in a way that says, "You matter. I want to be close." But to an avoidant, vulnerability is a threat, not a gift. And so they retreat, leaving you wondering what's wrong with you. Over time, the marriage can become more like a roommate situation, functional, civil, logistical. You raise kids, pay bills, go to family events. But the emotional core, the passion, the intimacy, the shared dreams, fades into the background. You become two people living parallel lives. You might look like a team on the outside, but inside you feel like a stranger in your own life. And that is one of the most heartbreaking forms of loneliness. But here's the truth you need to hear. It's not your fault. You didn't fail because you wanted more. You didn't ruin things by asking for connection. Your needs are not too much. They are human. They are valid. You deserve a relationship where you don't have to beg for scraps of affection. You deserve to be held when you're hurting, seen when you're vulnerable, and loved in a way that feels warm, not cold, distant, or conditional. Healing in this kind of marriage is possible, but it requires both partners to be willing. And that's often the hardest part, because avoidants rarely seek change unless they hit a breaking point. They're experts at pretending everything's fine. So if you're the only one doing the emotional labor, then it's not a partnership. It's emotional servitude. And at some point, you have to ask, how long can I keep pouring from an empty cup? Some partners stay and make peace with the emotional limitations, finding other sources of connection through friends, therapy, or creative expression. Others eventually leave, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. Because when you've spent years feeling invisible, numb, or alone, there comes a moment when your soul whispers, "No more." Not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving you. In the end, being married to an avoidant teaches you something profound about the human heart. We are not meant to survive on proximity alone. We are wired for connection, for warmth, for presence. And no matter how much you love someone, you cannot force them to meet you emotionally. That's their journey. Your journey is to stop shrinking for someone who cannot grow, to stop chasing someone who keeps running, and to remember that you too deserve to feel held, heard, and home in your marriage and in your life.